I'm Rachel Gregor. I'm at Hashimoto Contemporary in LA, and this is my solo show, Still Summer. So the name of the show is Still Summer. It comes from this idea of summer being this purgatorial moment, alluding to like the stagnant being like it's still summer, you know, just going on forever and forever, but also that kind of like paradise, Arcadian. So it's kind of a double meaning. And in between of kind of this paradise versus purgatory.
Tell me about the piece behind you.
I wanted the gaze to be kind of the narrative drive between these figures. So it's kind of like, are they friends? Are they daring each other to do something that they're uncomfortable with? So I wanted them to just kind of have that like over closeness. They're very comfortable touching each other, but the figure who's being flanked in the front has this kind of physical, uncomfortable body language with her. So there's going to be that unsettling moment in that narrative. She's kind of looking towards the viewer as if she's kind of pleading, like, come into this world, step into this world, take me away from this, or you have to join us in this kind of uncomfortable social situation that these girls are bringing each other in.
A lot of your work has sort of figures in it. Can you describe sort of how you came to that?
So I think I've always been drawn to the human figure with my work, and I just started kind of doing more narrative-based work with the figures. I think that's just because that's how I understand storytelling the best, is trying to create empathy through, you know, me and the viewer, and using the figures, especially using gaze, to draw the viewer into the piece and then tell a narrative through that. And just being interested in painters like Paula Rigo, for example. She does lovely work where she will use like Kafka as a reference, and so some of the pieces within this show reference classical literature as well as my own personal autobiographical, you know, experiences.
How long did it take you to make all these pieces?
So some of the work I had started during the pandemic. The painting titled Mud Trout was the first large gouache painting that I had started, and so some of the work, you know, has been going on for a couple years. But then a majority of it was made when Ken approached me about representation and we talked about doing the solo show, and then I was kind of like, okay, now I have a game plan. I know like kind of the thesis of what this body of work is going to be, and so then I was able to kind of fill in the blanks within that kind of overarching narrative that I wanted to tell. So yeah, some of the larger pieces maybe take me about 6 months or longer, but then the smaller ones can be anywhere from just like a few 8-hour sessions to, you know, end up working on it, you know, over the course of like a month or two. So this piece in particular, I get heavyweight paper. I did a ground of Noodler's ink, which is a very vibrant, saturated ink. And then I usually look at myself in the mirror. So for this one, I had to awkwardly prop myself up on pillows and do kind of a core strengthening exercise while I draw myself. In gouache and watercolor is how I kind of lay out the foundations, block and color. And then from there, I'm able to sit down on the easel and start working out the details.
It's a bunch of layers sort of put together, you'd say?
Yeah, so gouache, it's one of the oldest forms of paint. So it's really just like pigment, clay, and then they started introducing like gum arabic as a binder. Artist gouache is gonna smell really earthy. It's almost gonna smell like clay. And so it's very, very concentrated pigment loads. And so you can do washes of it and still have a lot of color and saturation and just build up those layers. And I'll use it with ink or other water-soluble mediums like watercolor. They tend to play really nicely together. And so you can use this really thick, opaque gouache paint and then do like a glaze on top of it with watercolor. Because when you water down gouache, it might end up looking a little chalky because it doesn't have much of that binder in it, but then you use watercolor, which is going to have that really sparkly, translucent quality to it, and that's when you get that kind of beautiful layering of coloring happening, and you can get some really fun color shifts that way too. So this one came from an idea where I did have a preliminary sketch for it. Sometimes I'll start with a preliminary sketch. Sometimes I just go right into the larger piece and I kind of draw in some figures, and then I'm like, okay, what are they doing? Where are they? And I have to start working out, you know, the situation. And sometimes I don't even know really who the characters are, what the narrative is, until, you know, I'm realizing the painting itself, and then I'm kind of able to develop the story as I work on it. So it's kind of a discovery process. Typically I don't like very straightforward, like mapping out the drawing, having a bunch of preliminary sketches, knowing exactly what the painting's gonna look like before it's over, because then I miss that discovery process, and that's where the magic of creating is for me, is not knowing what it's gonna look like in the end.
Tell me about what it's like painting in Kansas City.
Kansas City has a pretty good art scene right now, just like a tight community. There's a lot of support, a lot of great foundations for the artists that provide a lot of residencies. It's just a great open community for artists. So if you are not wanting to spend just an insane amount of money on a studio space, but still want to be somewhere where you feel like you have people around you and galleries that you can see, it's a great Midwest town for just a small, thriving art scene. And yeah, I've participated in a residency program there through the Charlotte Street Foundation. They provide 2-year studio programs to emerging artists, and so it's just a really supportive community.
Tell me about how you started getting into art.
So my mom actually was trained as a graphic designer and illustrator, so she was always very encouraging when I was a child to just let me draw. And so I think just from an early age, I always kind of knew I was going to be an artist. I grew up in Minnesota, and they have a wonderful arts high school there called Purpich, Center for the Arts Education. So I got to go to there for my junior and senior year, and they just really streamlined the process to apply for art colleges, and they just made that avenue very easy to navigate. So I was able to go to art school, and everything just kind of kept falling into place since there. It's just something I've always been driven towards.
What would you do without art?
I would probably go into horticulture. Since my parents have a nursery, that's something that I grew up doing, just being around. And so like I have kind of that intuitive sense of how to take care of plants and how to nurture. Or maybe culinary arts too. That's just something that I've also really enjoyed doing from a young age, is baking and being creative with, making food. And so it's always kind of like a, oh, what if dream, is like if I had a cute little bakery or something like that.
Is there anyone you want to shout out?
For this show in particular, big shout out to my husband, Eric Hibbler. He's an illustrator, does fantastic work with a lot of retro futurism and just in general, a lot of retro inspired illustration. And then if you're in Kansas City and if you ever need anybody to do any framing for you, state of the art on 39th Street. They did the framing for the show. Danny did a phenomenal job. And then Jorge at JGA Fine Art Services, he did all the crating and shipping for the show. And again, just phenomenal job. They were my dream team. They made me feel so taken care of. And then obviously Dasha curated it, and just beautiful, beautiful job. Thank you Hashimoto for just setting this up.